Indigenous tourism. Before we get started, we want to make sure that you are set for interpretation. And so please make sure that you have moved your cursor to the bottom of the screen where you will see a nice globe as you see the instructions here on the screen say, and choose the language that you prefer. Let's give you a second or two to get organized for interpretation. All right, let's hope that you're all set here and that our Spanish speakers are listening to this now in Spanish. I have the true honor to introduce what is our final, and I would argue one of the most important discussions of this forum. It's focused on planning for reopening. So we know that Indigenous communities throughout the hemisphere, many of them remain closed. And they've been affected disproportionately by the global pandemic and everything that relates to tourism, as we know. So it is my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished moderator, Mr. Rafat Ali, founder and chief executive officer of SKIFT, who will lead us through this conversation. So Rafat, over to you.
All right, thank you. And thank you for asking me to moderate this closing panel. I don't know if you're calling it closing, but it's certainly the last panel of the whole week. I've been tuning in and out of many sessions. In fact, in the middle of this, we also organized our own conference as well, so I've not been able to listen to everything. But for those of you who don't know SKIFT, we are a news and information research company focused on the business of travel. We cover all sectors of travel: destinations, tourism, tour operators, travel agencies, hotels, airlines, etc. If you go to skift.com, SKIFT, skift.com, you'll be able to see all the work that we do. And we've been around for about 8 years now and cover different parts of the travel sector, as I mentioned. We do conferences, we do research. And in my role as the CEO, I'm not the editorial talent of the company. We actually hire journalists to do that. But I was a journalist in my previous career and also write quite a bit as well. This is my distinct honor to do the closing panel for the day. And we have 5 great panelists. We've been covering at SKIFT, we've been covering obviously what's happening with the pandemic, what's happening with the reopening, reclosing, reopening, reclosing, unfortunately, in the world. And I wanted to have this panel and focus on, in different parts of Americas, what is the state of reopening today in the countries, in the regions, in the indigenous communities, how are governments helping or not these communities, what are they thinking about how 2021 goes, and from there, what are some of the hopeful signs that come out of this pandemic for indigenous-based tourism, and what do they see missing from the larger travel community, which to us is important because we cover that part, that they would like to see the larger travel community support the indigenous tourism as well. So the 5 panelists that we have, I'm going to briefly mention their names, and then what I'm going to do is ask each of them to introduce themselves for a minute, and then we'll jump into questions. We have about 1 hour to do this. I will ask questions for about 45 minutes, hopefully, and hopefully we'll get enough questions from the audience, and then we'll get into those questions as well. So we have Graciela, who's the president of Ak'Tenamit Association of Guatemala. We have Kevin, who's the president and CEO of Indigenous Tourism Ontario from Canada. We have Carla, who's the director of Guyana Tourism Authority from Guyana, obviously. Roman, who's the president of a network of indigenous tourism businesses in Quintana, Mexico. And then we have last minute addition, thank you very much, Galindo, Galindo Parra, who's the Vice President of Plurinational Federation of Community Tourism of Ecuador. So 5 of these panelists that are from different parts of America. So here's what I'm going to do. Graciela, I'm going to start with you. If you want to introduce yourself for about a minute on all the work that you do.
Bien, buenas tardes, ¿verdad? Desde esta orilla, desde
Good
Guatemala.
afternoon from Guatemala. It's my pleasure to welcome you. I'm Graciela Coy. I am the legal representative of Association Ak'Tenamit and also the president of Ixabal. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to share our work experience.
Okay. Thank you. Kevin, you want to go next?
Definitely. Well, Ani Bojo, Gigadon and A Dejnakas, Nadonising Donjabag, Ganoje Dodem. For simplicity of this session, you can just call me Kevin. That's the easier way, but I just gave my traditional introduction there to you. With that being said, I'm the president and CEO of Indigenous Tourism Ontario. And what we do is we simply help businesses. We try to help them get involved in the industry. So at the end of the day, they can tell their story on their terms. And there's a lot of different factors that we can get into. And I think I'll keep it nice and short today so that we can get into some of the conversation.
All right. I saw Carla join, or maybe not, from tourism, from Guyana tourism, but I'm not completely sure.
Yes, that's me, Rafat.
Oh, never mind.
Yes, Carla James, Director of the Guyana Tourism Authority, a semi-autonomous governmental regulatory agency that is responsible for developing and promoting sustainable tourism in Guyana. And we do that through collaboration with sister agencies and tourism private sector in order to maximize the local socioeconomic and conservation outcomes to improve the overall traveler experience. A lot of the work that GTA do is focused on becoming recognized both locally and internationally as a premier destination for protecting its natural and cultural heritage, providing authentic experiences and maximizing the local socioeconomic benefits. A large part of the product development work that we do ties to Indigenous communities, and I'm really, really pleased to be part of the panel this afternoon.
All right, thank you, Carla. Roman, you want to go next? You're on mute.
Perdón. Hola, Roman
Sorry.
Caamal, President.
Hi, my name is Roman Caamal, President of the Sacred Camino Sagrado Company. I'm the founder of the tourism community-based tourism network in Yucatan region.
All right, thank you. And Galindo.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, greeting from Ecuador. It's a pleasure to see you all, my friends, longtime friends. And it's a pleasure to be here in this forum at the closing day and during the past days as well. I'm the director of marketing of the Indigenous tourism in my community, Indija. And also I am ex-president and current vice president of the Plurinational Federation of Community Tourism in Ecuador. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that. Thank you for keeping it short. Let's start with this. What's the state of reopening in each of your regions? Obviously, different parts of the world are in very different stages, and obviously America is in different parts in very different phases. I hesitate to use the word reopening these days, obviously, because reopening may not exist as we all think of it. But Carla, why don't we start with you? What's the state of reopening in Guyana and other parts there?
Okay, so I would just say we are not there yet in terms of fully reopening the country. As a matter of fact, on the national level, our infection rate is still very much high and not really aligned with international best practice right now, a recommended amount of 5% to even think of reopening. However, most of the transmissions that we've had has been more of community level, not imported cases. So, you know, for months though, we have had repatriation flights coming in, and you know, even with that, as I said, no imported cases. So for this reason though, you know, we still have in place stringent safety measures and protocols. And as a matter of fact, just this week, we reopened our 2 international airports, but again, really controlling the amount of flights and passengers that come in with strict protocols, testing prior to getting here within 72 hours. And if not, you'll have to get tested on arrival. I think on the travel side internally, we need to get our infection rate down to 5% before we can reopen for even domestic travel right now. So what we're doing is really working with our local suppliers and host communities, especially, to ensure that you know, they implement more stringent hygiene and sanitation protocols, because the safety of our workforce, the communities in which these businesses operate, and of course, the health and safety of travelers are paramount. But in terms of timeline, we don't know that yet, but we're just preparing for it. But based on, I think, all travel statistics, I think international travel may not really start until Q1 2021.
Q1 2021. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Roman, you want to go next and give a sense of sort of what the state of reopening in your region is?
Sí, claro que sí, con gusto.
Of course, with a pleasure. In the particular state, particular case of the Quintana Roo state, we started the reopening at a 70% of the community-based businesses are already operating, and the other 30% is not yet operating based on safety issues. Those that are already working are implementing at the federal level all the security and safety protocols at the different levels, also at the state level. Also, in our particular case, we have created a semi-insular alliance to redesign our own protocols, safety and health protocols. Why is it that we're doing? Because many of the imported from the federation, they're very technical. All these protocols are very technical, and it's hard for the communities to implement them because it's hard to put them in practice. So we're just redesigning them so that they can be implemented in a very practical way in accordance with the reality of this new reality that we're seeing. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the community-based businesses are working hand in hand with a group of local leaders that are supporting them. Academia as well is supporting, and they are contributing in this process to facilitate the implementation, so that each one of them can actually reopen and start operating as soon as possible.
Thank you, Roman. Yeah, that 70% open is actually quite high compared to other parts of the world and other regions. And then one of the questions that I will have is about the guidelines and do they make sense for the communities? And it's good to hear that you're taking those and simplifying those. Kevin, I'm gonna come to you. From your perspective, what's the state of reopening?
Yeah, so in Ontario, I'm not going to speak for the whole country of Canada, but in Ontario, it's a large territory for those not familiar. So there's different things. So there's federal legislation that's kind of preventing some of the opening in the provinces, but there's regional approaches to opening. So here, what we've taken, and it's pretty common across the country, but in Ontario, it's the hyper domestic travel. Then there's we're building up to the interprovincial travel. Now there is like the US-Canada border is still closed. So there's a lot of our Northern Ontario businesses are heavily reliant on the US markets. So they're very challenged. In Ontario, we've got about 70% of our businesses that are, we hope they're only temporarily closed, but it's due to a lack of consumers. They had, I would say, probably some decent July and August with local travelers. We do have a large market in Southern Ontario with the greater Toronto area, but now that we're approaching winter, unless you have winter product, it's going to be very challenging. So we're very worried about our businesses. They definitely need some support, and we're going to do what we can to help them over those winter months. But the reality is, come spring next year, we're going to be down with a lot less businesses than we normally have.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I want to bring up one of the other questions, which is winter and who's equipped in different ways to for the winter tourism, which obviously is a different beast is not the right word, but a different product in many parts of the world. Um, Galindo, you want to go ahead and give a sense of what the reopening is in Ecuador and your part of the world?
Rafat, claro, y compañeros,
Of
miren,
course,
bueno,
colleagues. I would like to express that in our sector, I mean, tourism, indigenous community tourism, we still see a very limited opening on one hand. We continue to work in a process of
seguridad,
implementing all of these biosecurity protocols, develop strategies to safeguard the lives of people and the health of our local peoples, as well as our visitors. We have also been working in the reshifting of some of the community-based businesses in various areas like the disinfection spots, dispersed spaces, so that people are not packed in just one place, to take advantage of the open spaces, to actually have a natural
van trabajando.
distancing, natural social distancing. So we've been working on all of that. But there's one thing in particular that is very interesting, and it has to do with something we're doing in the country today. Unfortunately, this pandemic is hitting very hard our country, not so much as in the past months, but as you may have heard, Ecuador has been one of the countries that has been highly affected by the pandemic, and we've been trying to overcome that. I don't know if we're still in the flat line, on the flat line basis, but I believe that I think people are getting used to living with this pandemic, and sometimes that can generate a little bit of fear to all of us because we begin to be too confident. And I think we're worried because one of the interesting things that we have in this scenario is that we have been seeing a momentum on the local and the community tourism. So with after so many months of people being in their own home, I mean, about a month ago, we have seen a good increase of the number of people going out looking for destinations, rural destinations, community-based experiences. So in my community specifically, I can tell you that we have been reopening just a month ago, and it has been surprising to see the flow of tourists of between. I mean, it's between medium to high level, but we have been obviously forced to implement a limitation kind of protocol based on the municipality level regulations that has to do with the permits, because you can only work up to a 40% of your maximum capacity, tops perhaps 50%, and that's what we're doing currently. That's where we are at.
All right, thank you, Galindo. And we're one of the questions that I have is obviously domestic local tourism. I know each of you have different levels of that, and if there's a silver lining, hopefully through this pandemic everywhere in the world, I think for the first time in a long time, domestic tourism, which is generally being ignored, or local tourism, which is generally being ignored by the travel industry, I think is getting a renewed focus. Graciela, you're next. What's the state of reopening in your part of the world? Oh, I think your video went away. Graciela?
Sí. Bueno, a nivel de Guatemala.
Yes, okay, so in Guatemala, we can say that the activity have reopened as well as the airport, but in our region, in the Guatemala Caribbean, and the partners of the Mayan Caribbean in this place, we haven't restarted reopened the activities. We are still waiting for trainings. We have received some trainings at in virtual trainings. Some entrepreneurships are expected to open in January 2021. We are abiding by the guidelines of the good practices of prevention of COVID. So we are in the preparation and training stages, and also in the strengthening of each of the local community entrepreneurship. We are also managing improvements in terms of infrastructures and equipment in each of these projects, community projects, and also as a center of reserves. We are working in two layers. We are working with the students in the career, in the course of studies, to become and be trained as local community guides. And also we have worked and participated in virtual events in terms of, or in an attempt to promote all the tours we offer. So we are working in that area right now, always virtually, in alliance with the tourism organization in Guatemala.
Thank you, Graciela. So one of the things I'm hearing from you is you're taking this time to retrain and reskill, and potentially with the students to help them skill them for when the reopening happens. It looks like from all the panelists that the hope for reopening has sort of been pushed from this year, particularly international, obviously, until next year. One of the things that we've done two conferences in the last month. We did SKIFT Global Forum, where 60 to 65 different big executives from different parts of the global travel industry spoke. And then this week, day before, only 2 days ago, we did SKIFT Forum Asia. This was obviously all virtual online, where we heard from a bunch of leaders in the Asian tourism sector. All of them are at this point saying second half of 2021 is when the recovery starts. In terms of international borders reopening, pretty much everybody's sort of saying mid to late 2021, and then 2022 is sort of what we're looking at. Kevin, from your perspective, we're sitting next door to each other, obviously, and do you foresee sort of a year and a half wait for U.S.-Canada borders to reopen?
Yeah, well, and it's been stated by our government that the border's not opening until there's a vaccine. It's really that simple to them, as far as I know. So yeah, like the timelines you just shared, I think are pretty accurate, and we're getting more and more information daily and more input from well-educated people. So yeah, I think that's a reasonable time frame to work within, for sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I brought up questions to many of the executives at our conferences to say, have you even thought of like because everybody's thinking like 18 months to 24 months. Nobody's even willing to think about longer than that if it stays closed, because longer than that, if it stays closed, that sounds like disaster for the travel industry. So I hope that doesn't happen. But so one of the questions that I have, and I think some of you brought up these, in terms of government support for your businesses or for your communities, how has your government supported you, whether it's through guidelines or through financial support, other types of training support? If any of you want to go with this, whoever wants to go first. I think this is probably a question for all of you, only because obviously government is involved in each of your regions.
Okay, Rafat, ¿puedo responder?
Go ahead.
May I answer?
Ok, mira, en realidad, bueno.
Okay, look, our reality here has been quite complex, quite harsh somehow, because the reality of our country is that tourism has dropped in the last past years, not necessarily due to the pandemic, but from a political origin. throughout these last years, the tourism in our country has not been highlighted, so it has dropped, and increasingly with or due to the pandemic. So our governments, and I say this, I can say this straightly, we haven't received any support because they are directing their support to other sectors like health, of course, due to the pandemic. Also nowadays directed to the political sphere because we are facing elections next year, 2021. So they are supporting the political campaign. So all these factors that are very sad and very complicated are related to corruption issues. So this is quite complex for us, and we had to figure out a way out in our own terms by our own means and our own actions, probably better with the private sector or NGOs or members of the academia, and not so much with the public sector that is quite limited. At least my community, with the we have been in touch with the local, the municipal government, but not with the national level, and that is quite harsh. To work like this is quite hard, because even though we may have good and proper touristic products, and we may desire to create a sustainable and fair development in our communities, this is increasingly harder and difficult when you have no interest and support from your government. But this is the reality we're facing, and we have to keep struggling and fighting. And in spite of that, the communities have been creating a resistance against the government because they are feeling an increasing um, uh, uh, apart from the government.
Thank you, Galindo. In terms of reopening guidelines, let me just follow up with a question to you. In terms of reopening guidelines, have they come from the government, or are you looking at other sources, whether it's UNWTO or maybe the local municipal, in terms of the reopening guidelines, or you're coming up with your own?
Yo creo que en este sentido, Rafat,
Yeah, I think that we have created the guidelines ourselves. We have created them ourselves. We have developed them, and it has been a decision of one of our communities, even ourselves, being the federation, the one that represents the communities. We cannot oblige or promote or foster the communities to reopen if this is not their own decision. Is their own decision to open and reopen and implement these guidelines once they feel ready. So yeah, it is our own their own decision, our own decision.
Okay, all right, thank you, Galindo. Carla, from your perspective, obviously you sit at the top of the tourism authority for the whole country as well. Um, in terms of government support, as you mentioned, obviously the international borders are closed, but in terms of government support for the tourism sector, how is the government helping you, and you helping the tourism community in Guyana?
Yes. I think from a broad-based level, from a government standpoint, we were not able to provide that level of support from the financial side. I think we can all agree that tourism was really greatly impacted and is the hardest hit sector. But we were able to to deliver some support to Indigenous communities that are tied to the tourism value chain. And that included right away helping them with, changing their marketing messages to ensure they keep travelers informed as to what's happening at their properties, what they're doing, providing training related to marketing, and more recently on the hygiene and sanitation protocols that were developed by the GTA, which aligns to UNWTO recommended protocols. We've also had to increase awareness on COVID-19 of itself because of the remote locations of communities. They were not getting, I would say, more up-to-date information on what's happening, especially in the urban areas where, you know, the spread was happening. So we've had to increase our awareness programs on that front to really heighten, you know, that, you know, COVID-19 is real, it's serious, and we all need to play our part to help mitigate infections, basically. More recently, we were able to give out small grants to these businesses, the communities, to help procure hygiene and sanitation supplies that are needed in preparation for reopening, not only at the business level, but even at the community level itself, you know, providing them with supplies to make masks, signage, etc., which are really, really important in the whole communication and keeping everyone aware of what's happening. And more recently, with our national budget being passed, the government was able to approve a small financial support at a household level to really help cushion some of the impact. You know, people have been out of jobs, I think in Guyana from the tourism sector since March. So it's not a lot, but it is something that can, you know, help them during this time. But advocacy is something that we continue to do. We've done a lot of research, get a lot of feedback as to, you know, what is it that businesses need right now to help them prepare for opening. So we're using that information to advocate for support from the government at the highest level to see what resources can open up to help them, you know, I think just stay alive for the end of this year and help them prepare for a strong rebound going forward.
And you mentioned, let me follow up a little bit. In terms of domestic tourism, you mentioned that obviously Guyana doesn't have enough domestic tourism. Are you seeing some of that coming? Is it new, or is it sort of, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, this actually is a great opportunity for Guyana. I think, like you said, there are many countries that don't really look to domestic travelers, and it's very same for Guyana. However, I think during this period, you know, everyone is locked at home for months, etc., and are really eager to get out. And now tour operators, local suppliers are seeing that this is a great opportunity from them. And actually some of them have even started to test putting out some sample ads as to, you know, are you interested, inquire. And they were really quite shocked at the level of interest by locals to travel. So it's definitely a big area that we intend to support, knowing that international travel will not start to really happen, I would say, in a really smooth way until Q1 2021. This is the market that we are going to go to first, because internally we'll open up to them, obviously with stringent measures, even with people getting tested before they go to the communities, etc., because we want to ensure that these places that don't have any outbreaks, we want to maintain that. And the only way we can do that with testing and monitoring, continuous testing and monitoring. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of suffering and disruption as a result of COVID-19, but I think, you know, one good story to come out of this pandemic is, you know, people, Guyanese or people around the world generally are becoming more aware of nature and want to engage in their local surroundings. So we definitely look forward to a marketing campaign that targets this group. And a big part of that as well is we need to ensure that we continue to educate travelers, including locals, that they need to respect the places, the people, the culture, and the environments that they visit, because now more than ever, we have to take care of all of it.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Yeah, one of the sectors that is also doing well is what the industry calls VFR. Unfortunately, that's a terrible, terrible name that they put in there. Visiting family and relatives. It's also an ignored sector of the travel industry, which I think has been renewed. In fact, in the US, the airlines that focus on the VFR market, JetBlue, Southwest to some extent, et cetera, are actually doing well in that sector. So it's fascinating. Okay, any other panelists you want to answer that question, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I want to put some good vibes out there to our friends and our Haudenosaunee friends in Six Nations who are currently right now, after this past long weekend in Canada here, going through an outbreak within their community down in Southern Ontario. So hopefully everything works out well for them. little bit slightly different story here in Ontario and Canada. We do have some pretty decent support for the most part. Of course, we always appreciate any help we can get, but it's usually never enough, right? So with that, like there's been some direct resources provided to First Nation communities. We have 133 of those First Nations in Ontario, so they've been getting direct resources that their leadership negotiates and discusses with usually the federal government. Some of it's provincial as well with Ontario. So that's great news. With the federal and provincial counterparts, there's been some programs that excluded Indigenous groups, not purposefully, I don't believe, and but in due course, things have been worked out through various groups advocating for Indigenous groups across Ontario and across Canada. And there's been some really nice, not necessarily loan programs per se, because businesses don't need loans right now. They need basically some help, not a handout, but they need some help because it's challenging times. So some loan grant programs that are out there, some on the provincial level, some on the federal level. There's been some programs specifically developed in Northern Ontario here, for example, that helps businesses purchase PPE and to adapt their businesses to adjust to the sort of new normal while we don't have a vaccine. There's various wage subsidies out there to help with that, and there's some different training programs that are coming around as well. And these are all evolving at the same time. In terms of the guidelines, we have not tried to recreate the wheel. We've got some good, strong collaboration happening with various partners across Ontario and across the country, who we lean on to use their work and adopt it. Now, with that being said, within our First Nations, some of the communities have created their own policies and their own protocol because they have to, and they've got vulnerable people within the communities. There's several communities where I'm located on Manitoulin Island that have set up checkpoints and haven't been letting some people into their communities. It's essential services only. So there's a lot of different things that have been happening, but there's been some support, and we appreciate this, but more support is needed. And with ITO as an organization that's simply a helper to the industry and a servant to the business owners, we've been getting some assistance as well, which is great. This is the first time since our existence that we've had all partners coming to the table to work with us and work alongside us and let us do the work on our terms without telling us how to do it per se. They want to just simply support. So that's one of the silver linings that's come out of this crisis, is we find that there's a lot more people willing to talk to us and work with us, share with us, and just simply support us, which is good.
I just looked at the clock, and that flew by very, very quickly. I have a feeling there's something wrong with the clock, but it's not actually. It is flying really
Rafa,
quickly.
también quisiera aportar sobre la pregunta.
Go ahead.
I'd like to talk about your question also, Rafat.
Go ahead.
Sí, quisiera aportar sobre la pregunta.
I would like to add to that question, to that answer. In Guatemala, especially in the communities, through the INGWAT, the support that we have received, that is the manager of the tourism activities. These are we have been working on the organization and the participation at the virtual level of the promotion that we need to undertake during this time of pandemic. And we have seen during this pandemic the access to technology that the communities have been able to have, especially those working with the community tourism. We have been supportive of that effort. We have been logistically helping them to facilitate these processes, these training processes, at least virtually. At the same time, we have, as a network, developed certain processes because the guidelines, sometimes they have a lot of requirements to comply with and supplies that need to be and items that need to have each one of the businesses. But that obviously calls for a large investment. And since the pandemic has started, the community businesses have not generated any income, and they've been working in other activities like the fishing, agriculture, trying to survive, and obviously to provide to for their families. And, the government and through the INGWAT, that has been the support that we have been receiving. And as a network, we have also continued to do every effort for the cooperation, because it is a very critical situation in the community since they are not having any income. We're not yet receiving tourists, but we are looking forward to receiving them. We've been preparing for that, and we're very positive and optimistic as for the reopening in the future. And through the events that have been organized like this one virtually, we have been establishing contacts and alliances with some of the tour operators that are interested also in reaching out to those communities and support us when it in regards to the promotion and the services that each of the groups can offer for our regarding our regions.
Thank you, Graciela. In terms of sort of tours, and you mentioned, Graciela, group tours, and Roman, it looks like I think you're the only one that works in the group tour business. Prior to COVID, is the majority, what's the split between sort of independent tourism in indigenous communities in your regions versus sort of group tours? And it seems like group tours is going to be the longest out of every type of travel in the world, just because group by nature obviously is more dangerous from a health perspective. So how are you thinking about sort of group tours versus independent? Roman, if you want to tackle that.
Bueno, en el caso de nosotros, aquí en México.
Well, here in Mexico, the community businesses work in a minimum operation capacity. We do not work with large groups. So that has helped us that when that time when the government has limited to 40% of the capacity of touristic activities, it didn't represent such change, because we do represent small groups. This is the type of tourism where the tour guide guides limited groups of 10 to 15 people. We do not manage large groups of people. So each of these businesses that deal with maybe small businesses that deal with 10 or 15 accommodation places made us made our activities simpler. We almost do not work with this segment of large groups. We work alongside specialized tourism, specialized in food tourism, specialized in agricultural tourism, and that is why it is simpler to operate, because in the near future we will depend on the local tourism. Before, due to our local, our geographical location, we depended on the international tourism, but currently we are receiving local domestic tourism that is closer to us right now.
Thank you for that, Roman. In terms of sort of the future ahead of in tourism in your indigenous communities, what are the silver linings each of you are taking? Well, obviously domestic is certainly one. I would like to hear from you, Carla. Maybe you want to start. What are sort of the silver linings? I know you talked a little bit about domestic. Obviously, Guyana offers a lot of outdoor opportunities. That's a big, also a sector that's doing well. I wonder what's the state of short-term rentals in your country and sort of Airbnb, and has that seen a resurgence in these times, at least with the locals, or it's too early to tell?
Actually, Guyana is not very big on Airbnb. I think right now we're starting to get in that we probably have over 100 listings, but it's not something that is actively utilized by the domestic market. I think in terms of silver lining as to what's happening now, I think COVID-19 just reinforced our approach to sustainable destination management and marketing, which are focused on nature and adventure experiences, developing community-led and known tourism enterprises, and our rich culture and heritage. During this time, I think it was really good to see, people businesses take a step back to see how they can improve their services and product offerings. And we know actually during this time, there are a lot of, I would say, businesses, especially within Indigenous communities, are really coming together to do what's called self-help. To redo their bathrooms, do more training, things of that nature, which will only help to give them a competitive advantage when it opens for travel. I think the good thing is, until recently, Guyana has really been off the tourism radar because we're not touristy. So mass tourism is not a problem. So like the young lady just said, I think it really does.
Not a word. I guess over tourism is not a word that you have to worry about.
No. As a matter of fact, you can travel for days in Guyana and see no other human. And we'd only be coming up face to face with maybe some wild animals. And that's really what makes us, I think, unique. And it really positions us to be one of the safest destinations in relation to social distancing, vast open pristine spaces, and by design as well. Guyana, I think our tours and even the locations that host groups are very small groups, 8 to 10. You wouldn't find properties with more than that. So I think for that is, I think in the past, maybe that would have been a disadvantage, but now those things are now an advantage to us. Having an entire national park or waterfall all to yourself, it's experiences that you don't really hear about this day and age. You're always competing to, get into the spot for the perfect photo, etc. In Guyana, you don't have that. And as well, I think, from our approach to sustainable development, we're not focused on increasing the volume of travelers. We're more focused on, the value each traveler represents. And travelers that come to Guyana are interested in authentic nature, culture, adventure experiences. And they tend to stay longer. They spend more than the average leisure traveler. They're also more focused on the experiences and less on the amenities, which are somewhat rustic in our hinterland. And more importantly, they want to leave a positive impact on the people and places that they visit. So COVID-19 just reinforced that we were on the right track, and we want to keep it that way.
Anybody else want to jump in silver linings that you're taking away? I know that these are tough times all around, but human nature is basically silver lining. So Kevin, I see you're raising your hand.
Yeah, just really quickly. Carla, thanks for that so much. And I want to come and visit for sure. One of the silver linings, definitely I think for all of us, is as the global tourism industry recovers or rebounds out of this. So when we talk about that, the back half of next year, I think we're ideally situated to host people, given that there's going to be some individuals who want to keep low, stay away from other groups. And the way we're structured, I've always found over my 18 years in the industry is, the best experiences are those that are more intimate, the smaller group sizes that they were just talking about. And people are going to want those, and they're going to want them for some time, and then they're going to really discover who we are. And I know you don't have a problem with mass tourism now, but you're going to have to figure out ways to control the people that are going to want to come there eventually, right? So we've got we found as one of the silver linings, the collaboration and the creative thinking is something that's really coming out of this. It's been a great time to strategize and get to work on projects that we've had on the back burner or that we've been thinking about doing. And for us in particular, working towards like virtual tours, virtual reality tours, augmented reality tours, and then doing some consumer matching where we literally match people up with, Indigenous experiences that they're going to enjoy. And the quick story that I usually share is when I was a former guide, we'd always have the individuals, the partners that were dragged by their spouse to attend a landshore excursion or a group tour or whatever it is, and they're not quite really fully engaged and involved. And sometimes they were a little bit disruptive on our tours, sometimes disrespectful. Well, if we're consumer matching and we've only got a limited supply, we can pick and choose who comes and spends time with us in our communities. We can tell our story on our terms and set the parameters. And I think coming out of the crisis, we're going to see we're in a great position to be able to manage that on our terms if we choose to.
All right, thank you for that, Kevin. Anybody else wants to jump in? I have a follow-up question for folks. One question I have any of you used, how have you used online? A lot of the tour companies in tourism obviously are doing online tours, virtual tours, to mixed reception. I wonder if any of you have sort of tried online tours and online reaching efforts, marketing, etc. in this time where obviously people can only experience all these things online.
Bueno, te comento un poco, Rafat. Mira, bueno, un poco hacia la pregunta.
Rafat, from our perspective, I think we need to generate new strategies in the future in the different areas. Virtual tour is something totally new. I got to be honest with you at the community level. I mean, however, the strategy is being implemented for this upcoming year to 2021, how to make more personalized tours that can be more specialized on the one hand, but also on the other hand, that it be limited to small groups, study groups. So the tours, the actual tours, the real tours will be more specialized. There won't be that large groups. I think with that, we're going to generate more control and more secure safety for our people and for them. We definitely expect that to yield results. We're focusing on the international tourism. That was my comment. For the national domestic tourism, there's a different strategy that we're applying right now. As I said a while ago, they're already coming to our places and we're just carrying out activities where there's a large number of people, like trekking, camping, bird observation, agricultural activities that for many years have been kept as traditions in our country. And obviously, because tourism there would not be set aside, I think tourism is complementary to their activities. So we have to support that as well. Now, when it comes to the virtual platforms issue, that in the last couple of years, people were becoming familiar in the communities. They were becoming familiar with that because all these platforms like TripAdvisor, Booking, Airbnb, it's something relatively new for the communities here, which in the last couple of years, perhaps they have become more familiar with this. But today it has somehow gone down a little, we could say, and we expect that in the future, this could serve the purpose of taking advantage of these platforms to promote these community businesses and experiences.
Thank you, Galindo. Graciela, I saw you raise your hand. I don't know if you wanted to go ahead. In terms of silver linings that you're seeing, or going ahead. You're on mute, go ahead.
Bueno, lo que nosotros hemos venido desarrollando.
What we have been doing is our participation in business rounds, virtual business rounds. In Guat, our institute does the coordination and it invites the tour operators. And there is another additional thing, which is the fact that we can sell not only products and services, but tourists can volunteer in their communities, not only to go there as a consumer and stay and be there in the communities, but also they have been given the opportunity to contribute as volunteers. In our network, there are various groups that undertake different activities. So at the end of this panel, I believe that there will be a presentation of what we have been doing in our communities.
También de lo que se ha
that is part of what we have been organizing, what we've been promoting, to sell all the tour packages but also to allow for the tourists, the visitors, to contribute also in the communities. In our case, it's an association. We operate an educational center, and visitors, tourists, can actually volunteer to take part in the English classes or contribute somehow in terms of infrastructure, a combination of factors and activities. We also have groups of Garifuna women that have mural tours, and various activities are actually carried out in the communities. It's something that that we want to include in this process or in these activities, these promotion activities. Currently, we are working especially with the domestic groups based on all the recommendations. We have been working with 10 to 15 people, a person group, based on all the protocols that have already been set up. That's what we have been trying to do during these months. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have 15 minutes left. I got permission from Maureen to add 10 minutes to this panel. Thank you, Maureen. And I see one question from Edward. I see Edward also joined here in the webinar. I don't know if you want to ask yourself, or I'm happy to ask one of the questions that are there. Says, beyond COVID, how has climate change impacted your ability to plan for the future? If anybody wants to answer that question, and I'll ask the participants if they want to put their questions here, and hopefully we'll get them answered. Obviously, climate change, a bunch of factors have been there pre-COVID, and in many ways have been accelerated in these times. So the question from Ed has been, how has climate change impacted your ability to plan for the future? Kevin, go ahead.
I'll share at least our perspective on things. So definitely climate change is on our radar. So one of our core philosophies, which I think is pretty consistent across most Indigenous groups, if not all, I would say all, in my opinion, but is our environmental philosophies, right? So when we talk about the tourism industry, and I've been involved for almost 20 years, and when we look at international travel and the mass tourism models and the global tourism models, we know that it actually contradicts our core philosophies from an environmental perspective. And a lot of the things we just talked about with silver linings and smaller group sizes and more intimate interactions, the light that has now been shone, and I'd like to think that more people have now been awoken by COVID. I know it's COVID aside is the question, but I think because of COVID, people are now thinking, okay, I can enjoy some things locally. We can be more environmentally responsible, sorry. And I think that, some are doing that, making that conscious decision, and some aren't. But it allows us as Indigenous tourism practitioners to properly plan and take it into consideration legitimately, while not having to worry about fully buying into the mass tourism, global tourism model, and having to worry about over tourism, because now it sort of naturally aligns with the global pandemic and the situation we're in, and we're not trying to play catch up with the mainstream industry.
Anybody else wants to tackle that? Otherwise, we can move on to some other questions.
Sí, en nuestro caso, pues nosotros como pueblos
in our
indígenas,
case, as Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities and organizations, our community-based activities are tools that allow to mitigate the effects of the climate change. The communities have been hardly hit by the COVID, but also the climate change, somehow disrespectful position of some visitors. And we have actually taken up commitments towards that. We have been preparing, training our community, organizing ourselves to take on activities, community-related activities. And we're trying to preserve the biodiversity of our resources, of our natural resources, land, and also the cultural diversity that we have in each one of our countries. So I think we pandemic has really brought a lot of bad things, but it also brought a lot of opportunities. And I believe that as communities, we have been organizing ourselves, getting some new resources, and we've been empowering ourselves, trying to live with this. We cannot leave aside all the prevention issues and the guidelines and protocols that need to be taken care of. We need to work together in alliance with all the institutions that are regulatory and rule over the tourism sector in our country. And we have continued to organize comprehensive projects so that we can also preserve our natural resources and biodiversity, which is very abundant in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Graciela. In terms of tourism season, historically, obviously, the tourism industry has been very organized around tourism seasons, the peak season and the off-peak season. Do you foresee, any of you, sort of a rebalancing of the seasons? Because especially if local becomes a much bigger part, then you sort of spread out, hopefully, the tourism season in a longer way. Kevin, you were talking about obviously winter coming, and winter tourism is a very different product, particularly in Canada. Potentially maybe not in other parts of Americas, but certainly in Canada. Are you seeing sort of a rebalancing of the tourism calendar?
Yeah, I'll quickly speak from our perspective. I would definitely agree with that statement. And there's going to be, at least from our role as a supporter of the industry, I know there's a lot of work that we need to do to help businesses prepare for these other opportunities in the other seasons. So yeah, there is definitely going to be a rebalancing. And the great part is it's going to help create the businesses to be a little bit more viable. Right? They can offer more throughout the course of the year. We've got 4 seasons here in Ontario, and it changes. And most of our businesses are only operating from May till October for the most part, so they get a half a year. And I think as things sort of change and they evolve, yeah, you're going to see some new and exciting product come out of this as, again, another one of those silver linings.
Thank you. Deborah asks a question, very important question. Are your communities affected by the racial issues that are now very present in the US? Does it affect your tourism? For example, many Black travelers from US going home to different parts of the African continent. Let me rephrase a little bit of that question. Are you seeing sort of a reckoning and more awareness of Indigenous communities in your parts from sort of the settler population, so to speak, in your parts of the world? Any of you, if you want to tackle that.
I would say for Guyana, no, we're not affected by this in any way. I think as a country too, we really do pride ourselves with being a multi-ethnic society. As a matter of fact, you come to Guyana and everyone celebrates each other's religion and festival. It's truly one people here in Guyana. So lucky for us, no, but I think we're always mindful of how Indigenous communities or peoples are marginalized still in this day and age. So we always want to ensure that there's awareness regarding respecting their culture, the environments and the places that they visit. So, and that applies to everyone, basically.
Yeah, I'll just chime in really quickly. This is definitely a very sensitive question. From my perspective, I don't know if we're affected by what's going on in the US, but racial issues are very predominant in Canada in some regards, right? We've got a long history here. And like with, there's residual effects of residential schools and other issues. And we can just look to right now what's going on in New Brunswick with the lobster fishers and the conflict that's there. Like these are longstanding issues, and for Indigenous people to still have to deal with some of these things, yeah, there are still racial issues, but I wouldn't necessarily, attest it to what's going on in the U.S. there are some very positive things coming out of it. I see a lot of, quote, to use your term, settlers that are becoming more and more educated. And again, another silver lining that's coming out of this is for us here in Ontario, with Toronto being in our sort of catchment area, there's a lot of first and second generation Canadians who are very interested in Indigenous cultures because they're typically Indigenous people themselves from other countries who have now immigrated here. And that's a great way to educate a new wave of individuals, at least in our country and our part of the world.
There's a question, and we're about to close, but I just want to. Is U.S. a major source of tourism for each of your communities, or U.S. From an international tourism perspective?
To answer that, quite frankly, yes. As a matter of fact, the US market itself accounts for, I think, 46 to 50% of visitor arrivals to Guyana. But a large portion of that US traveler market, which actually ranges 65 to 70, is actually the VFR market, or the diaspora. So, and I think the reason for that too is Guyana has really good airlift connections with the US. So I know that trend will continue until we expand our airlift to Europe, etc.
Yeah, I'm able to partake of great Guyanese food, and I live in Queens, so I actually don't live that far from many of the Guyanese communities. In terms of U.S. as a market, obviously a lot happening in the U.S. Oh my God, so much happening. I'm sure there's so much news that's happened in the last hour that I haven't seen. In terms of U.S. as a market for each of you, how are you thinking or rethinking the U.S. market for you, any of you? And let's close with that, I suppose. Roman, you want to go? Because obviously Mexico has a big giant market and it's actually doing okay.
Sí, en el caso de nosotros aquí.
Yes, in our case, in Mexico, in Quintana Roo, due to the connectivity we have through airplane and the planes that go to and from the United States, we depend highly on the tourists coming from the States and from Canada. But fortunately, in terms of the Indigenous community, due to the segment we are working on in this nature tourism, we have witnessed an important increase in the demand of the European tourism, that are the segment that are looking for this non-massive massive tourism. So before, we depend highly on the States and Canada, but in the last 2 years, we have been able to access to the European market as well.
Fascinating. Anybody else wants closing thoughts on that?
Just really quickly, we're in a similar boat like the U.S. markets. What we do is we align with our mainstream partners like Destination Ontario and Destination Canada, and they've got roles and they got markets that they target. So we align with them, but we still have to do our own thing. We still have to, do our own promotion because there's no one better to represent us than us. Right. And U.S. markets are strong. Don't get me wrong, but for us, what Roman is seeing is, the European markets, and I've been involved in those since 2003. Incredibly strong for Indigenous product, at least in Canada. There's high demand, unprecedented demand in all of our time leading up to COVID. So, the US markets are very strong and important, as are the domestic markets, but for Indigenous products, the European markets are still incredibly important to what we do.
Okay. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll, Graciela, it looks like you wanted to close.
Sí. Bueno, para nosotros.
Yes. For us, we have received tourists that are from the States and from Europe, but in our experience, we have worked mainly with small groups, and these are the people or the tour operators that are directly contacting the clients. So the reservation center, we are working to manage the logistics of this. But due to the pandemic, we are working with the promotion, and we are expecting to receive national visitors, and we are hoping that this will be done in April and at the end of the year. But we're talking about visitors from our country.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I hope next year when we gather, at least we're able to gather hybrid, if not fully in person. At least hopefully some of us will be able to meet in person, some of us joining online. I think that is the new reality of the world, will continue to be. And Selene, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Rafat. And, you know, for this closing segment, we want to sort of turn it over to our distinguished panelists and to you, Rafat. It means so much to have you join this conversation and to shine an important light on the challenges and all the opportunities as well that were discussed. I think, it's very rare that we get to talk meaningfully with Indigenous leaders about what is occurring in their communities in regards to Indigenous tourism and at this real critical juncture. So thank you for joining us, Rafat, and also thank you to Carla, to Graciela, to Roman, to Kevin, and also to Galindo. This has been a great large panel. We ran over, but it just shows that we could go on for a while here. There's a lot to talk about. And so we're very grateful to all of you for having taken time to be with us. And then to our audience for staying on. The group has grown over the hour and a few minutes that we've been chatting about these important issues, and we'd like to encourage you to stay on. We have a closing keynote by Pilar Montesinos, and she's the president of one of the largest indigenous tourism networks in Peru. So she'll be wrapping up all the activities. So I hope that the audience stays on with us. And also a bit of gratitude here to our sponsors, Wind Creek Hospitality, Intrepid Travel, Destinations International, Square, Visit Albuquerque, and the 106 Group. Definitely would not be possible to do this without your support. So very grateful for that. Before our moderator and panelists rush off, we'd love to take a quick photograph of the panel. So if the audience would bear with us for a second here, we're going to do this quickly so that we have this for posterity a little bit. So smile, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rafat, and again to all of you, Graciela, Roman, Galindo, Kevin, and Carla. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and for the audience, please stay on because we will be moving directly into the closing keynote.